Okay, welcome everybody to Words from the Water. In this event, we're going to have three swimming writers discussing the currents flowing between swimming, life writing, and poetry. And I'd just like to start by thanking our funders. So this event is funded by Great Place Lakes and Dales, who funded an event series in Grasmere last year called Little Unsuspected Paradise. And we've been very generously allowed to host this event in Ariel Festival. So thank you to Ariel for having us as well. So today we have for you Jessica J. Lee, Nina Minya Powells, and Elizabeth Jane Burnett, who are all going to talk a little bit about their writing and read a bit of their writing. So first off, we're going to have some readings, but I'll just introduce everybody and give you a little bio for everyone as well. I've tried to make sure these are up to date because there's lots of exciting new publications happening and forthcoming from all of our amazing writers. So Jessica J. Lee is a British-Canadian Taiwanese author and environmental historian and winner of the 2019 RBC Taylor Prize Emerging Writer Award. Her first book, Turning, a swimming memoir, was published by Virago in 2017 and named amongst the best books of the year by both Canadian newspaper The National Post and German newspaper Die Zeit. My German's not very good, as you can tell there. It was named a notable book by the Sigurd F. Olsen Nature Writing Awards in the USA and longlisted for the Frank Heggie Award for Emerging Authors in Canada. It's also the first swimming memoir I read that I really felt connected with, which was really important for me. She's got a PhD in environmental history and aesthetics and was writer-in-residence at the Leibniz Institute for Freshwater Ecology in Berlin from 2017 to 2018. She's also the founding editor of the Willow Herb Review. Her second book, Two Trees Make a Forest, on memory migration in Taiwan, was published in 2019, and it's just been shortlisted for the 2020 Boardman-Tasker Prize for Mountain Literature. And she's currently in the process of moving from Berlin to the UK. Nina Minya Powells is a poet and zine maker from Itaria, New Zealand, currently living in London. She's the author of a food memoir, Tiny Moons, A Year of Eating in Shanghai, which was published by the Emma Press earlier this year, and is a really beautiful little book. And several poetry pamphlets, including Luminescent from Seraph Press in 2017, and Girls of the Drift, also from Seraph in 2014. In 2018, she was one of the three winners of the inaugural Women's Prize, and in 2019 won the Nan Shepherd Prize for Nature Writing, and her book that she's developed through the Nan Shepherd Nature Writing Prize is going to be coming out next summer. She's also the founding editor of Bitter Melon Press, a risograph press that publishes limited edition poetry pamphlets by Asian writers. And her poetry collection, Magnolia, came out with 9 Archers this year as well. So Nina's had a busy year for publishing. And then thirdly, we have Elizabeth Jane Burnett, who's a writer of English and Kenyan heritage, born in Devon, and her work's inspired by the landscape in which she was raised. Her creative and critical work explores environmental themes. Publications include poetry collections Swims, which is from Penned in the Margins in 2017, and was a Sunday Times Poetry Book of the Year, and Of Sea, which is forthcoming from Penned in the Margins in 2021. She's also published an academic monograph, a social biography of contemporary innovative poetry communities, The Gift, The Wager, and Poethics, which was from Palgrave in 2017, and the geologic memoir, The Grassling, from Penguin in 2019, which explores her family home in Devon. She's Associate Professor in Creative Writing at Northumbria University. So that's our three amazing writers. Is everything okay, Jessica?
Yeah, it was the postman likes to think that he can leave all the packages for the entire flat, like all the building, with me, and so he
that's
was
quite exciting. That means you get lots of unexpected gifts.
I mean, it means that he knows that I'm home all the time. So.
It's better than our postman just opens our door and leaves things in the hallway, whether we're here or not. I
mean, that would be easier, actually.
I probably shouldn't have said that out loud, should I? Like, people will just be coming in our house and leaving things. Only nice things, please. Thank you. So each of our writers is going to read a little bit of their work now. So Jessica, if we start with you.
Yeah. I thought I would read a little bit from some waterfall swims in Two Trees Make a Forest. So we're going to travel to the Central Mountain Range in Taiwan now. From the peaks, the water flows sweetly. The day we hiked towards Chilai on the Nungao Trail, the sun had hung wanly amid the cloud. There remained a trace of warmth, so a group of us had stopped at a three-tiered cascade of white water where a pool glinted at the base. We'd reached it by clambering down a small mound of rocks into a sheltered crevice of the mountain, which swallowed us with the sound of the Nungao waterfall. The tumble barely patterned the edge of the ice green pool, and elated at the thought of cold on my limbs, after carrying my pack up the heavy pack up the mountain, I stripped down to my underwear and slipped in, shuffling my way across the rocky floor. It was deep, and I swam freely in the clean cold of it, some 3,000 meters above sea level. On the Hengchun Peninsula far south, at Qigong Waterfall, 7 holes, a flow descends a small jungle-covered peak at the beginning of a mountainous break between the peninsula and the Central Mountain Range. The first pools in its lower reaches drain into a small creek and then into channels tunneling underground, rocky and unremarkable to look at, until flowing out to sea. The 4th hole of Qigong sits on a rocky ledge that drops sheerly to the pools below. I remember swimming in that upper pool once on a visit with my mother and sister as rain fell onto the canopy trees. We settled by a milky blue-green pool where an airy stream of water spilled from a ledge far above and spun down to the pool below. We plunged in together, a family bobbing in the barrel-shaped depths, the pool no wider than 8 feet in diameter. The rock had been smoothed by an eternity of falling water, and a placid swimmer could rest on the polished stone and look out over the green valley below. Its wide and open sky was framed by hills, and the occasional bird caught wing in the white cloud. The autumn migration was near its close. We'd ventured south late in the season. Swimming there, I saw joy on my mother's face, how much she must have missed in the years after she and my father divorced and my sister and I grew up, in the careful life she lived alone in Canada, going to work, running in the park, cooking simple meals for herself. I'd spent recent years collecting and examining old photographs of her. I'm very sorry. Brisket, stop. That's enough. Thank you.
Very moved by that passage.
As a small child, our resemblance had been there. My eyes were darker, my hair straight and long and black, my arms skinny like hers. I looked Chinese. In time, though, my shoulders grew broad, my cheeks red, my eyes light. I took the height of my Welsh relatives and now stand many inches taller than my mother. But beaming in that mountain pool, I shared her happiness, and I saw in her face something of my own. So.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Brisket, for those critical comments on the piece. I think he's just thinking about how important sharing is.
Yeah, I'll get him to be quiet.
Okay, Nina, do you want to do yours next?
Thank you. This is really fun. I wish we could be in the same room together, but at some point we will, I'm sure.
One day.
Yeah. I think I'll read the poem that I've actually written for Aerial Festival website first, one of them. So I've been swimming a lot this summer, as much as I can, to kind of stay feeling like myself. And some of these poems have come out of that. This one is called Tide Marks. I have never swum this far north before. The sea tastes different to the South Pacific, which is salt bitter, so strong you can't taste anything afterwards. The sea burns your tongue. Here the taste is softer, doesn't make you spit and gag. The tide pulls gently on your hips, draws your body along the line without you noticing. I have never swum this far north before. A dip in the sand, down under the crest, arms heavy into the wind, white turbines spinning like ghosts on the horizon, as if in a bright dream of air travel, looking down on the pearlescent surface from above. Out there, Mist floats down to touch the imaginary borders. I have never swum this far north before, where people who live by the sea draw thick lines on maps, fold the maps in half, then in half again, and tuck the maps under their pillows at night. At night they dream of borders. I'll read a really short excerpt now from the opening of my book of essays coming out next year, Small Bodies of Water. I printed it out so that I wouldn't have to read off my phone, and it printed out like this. So it should be okay, but so this is from the opening of that. When we moved back to New Zealand, I taught myself not to be afraid of open water. There's no sand here at the edge of Wellington Harbour, on the beach by my parents' house, only pebbles and driftwood and shells. Everything scrapes against me, leaves a mark on my skin. Rocks, wind, salt. To swim in Wellington Harbour is to swim in the deep seam between two tilted pieces of land that have been pulled apart over time. Repeated movement along the Wellington Fault caused cliff formations to rise up above the harbour's western shore. Little islets, Makaro, Matiu and Mokopuna, which punctuate the narrow neck of the harbour, are actually tips of a submerged ridge that runs parallel to the Taniwha-shaped peninsula. Near Oriental Bay, the harbour carries debris from a summer storm. Shattered driftwood, seaweed blooms, plastic milk bottle caps, the occasional earlobe jellyfish. The further out I swim, there is a layer of clear molten blue. It's January, the height of summer, and I've flown home from Shanghai, where I've been living for a year. My friend Kerry and I dive below the rolling waves. Right now, neither of us know where home is exactly, but underwater the question doesn't seem to matter. Emerging from nowhere, a black shape draws close to my body and I lurch, reaching for Kerry. But then I see the outline of wings. The black shag is mid-dive, eyes open, wings outstretched and soaring down into the deep. Kawo Poo, the native New Zealand black shag. They perch on rocky beaches all over the Wellington coastline, holding their wings open to dry in the wind and sun. Another wave rises over us, and we turn our bodies towards it, opening. Home is not a place, but a collection of things that have fallen or been left behind. Dried agapanthus pods, the exoskeleton of cicadas, discarded shells of quail eggs on Popo's plate, cherry pips in the grass, the drowned chrysanthemum bud in the bottom of the teapot. Some things are harder to hold in my arms. The smell of salt and sunscreen, mint green blooms of lichen on rock, wind-bent Pohutakawa trees above valleys of driftwood. Thanks.
That was so beautiful, thank you. So Small Bodies of Water grew out of the essay that you had in Ponds as well, didn't it?
Well, first it was published by Jessica.
Yeah, of course it was. That's where, yeah.
Yeah, which I forgot to mention.
I'd forgotten that I'd read it there first.
And then again At the Pond, yeah.
Yeah, so this wonderful book At the Pond about the Hampstead Women's Pond, which is really lovely. If anyone listening isn't aware of that as a swimming book, it's a really lovely swimming book with lots of essays by different women about their experience at the pond. It's really wonderful. Okay, Elizabeth Jane, let's hear from you.
Yes, I'm just going to read a few from the forthcoming poetry collection that you mentioned called Of Sea. This came about from a survey that I saw that had 39 invertebrates registered in the stretch of coast that I would swim a lot in Devon. And so these each poem relates to one of those invertebrates and encounters through swimming. So I'll start with a fly and then we'll go through some worms and see where we end up. But this is murky-legged legionnaire fly. Muscles move the murk of sea dirt. Blurt of sun off wing or throat floats for a blink and then dark, flickerless mud along the mouth. Darkness in the teeth, a suck of salt too steep for breath to follow. Only seconds from defeat, the water darkling deep. Millipede. More. Lick. Mulch. Moss. Find a way in by skin. I tear, I burst, cut off the fruit of my teeth, a drum, a bone. Find a way out of skin, bite, wear a way at, nag, gnat, gnaw, flow. Earth nymph, soil swimmer, flow, polish, the clear part of any stone. Greenleaf worm. Turn, curve, slink through sheet of water. I sting, I pierce men, a constellation of shark's teeth. Strapless, wingless, an unforgettable pop song. A wind flows through me, limbless. All I do is echo. Bootlace worm. Body within body, whirligig, flighty. If 180 feet long, you have to have a system. You must know a helicopter or a tuning peg, or if washed ashore, how to be a seashell. But these get lost in the twirling muscle of the present and the scream of being one thing. Sand flea. A hop, a skip, a dancer, a leap, a Lindy, an aviator, originating in Harlem, in Dawlish, in the early rap lyrics of the High Tide Mark, a beat, a whip of sand, a throb of heart, a track made by breathing, appearing in darkness, night jigger or jar, moth, might, spect, mist, the size of the space between words is. Ruddy darter. To throw yourself against an arrow or tide, to startle or stitter, sharpen, glitter as mackerel leap, sudden stutter water breath dug as a root from body ripped up like a fished wing tip. Hoverfly. Things pass, over, nerve, wing, a broad beating sky that never fills entirely like the sea. In the midst of low colour, a twist of sky. Peel a lemon, causes you to rise from thick seaweed, pop through sparkled water. Where waves blossom, sun foams, your eyes lift up from their bones. A whole sky clearing its throat, such hope. Brimstone. A simmering sky I tuck myself under. Nothing can catch a brink, a bank, an edge, even if it does flow over. I take my body to the margins, hold, hover. Goldswift. Out glimmer, out shimmer, out gleam, rush, bright gull. Whether bird or plane or butterfly, whether dancing girl or alien, whether plant or a belonging to another country, here is what you are. Was it air? Was it sea? Was it land? Was it words? Was it paper? Was it rot? Was it danger? Was it promise? Was it done or was it thrown? Was it foretold? Was it meant? Was it a scent? Similar to pineapple that brought you here is where you are. Was it bracken? Was it an impediment to motion? Was it fern or foreign? Was it rust or was it rush? Is it a game we can all play? A name or instruction? Okay, this is Gatekeeper, and then I'll end with Meadow Brown. So these are just a couple of butterflies, I think, to end with. When nothing is full or dirtless, not to be eaten or confessed, when the unwhole, unmooned surface is left, there will be no swimming in no sea. There will be no swimming and no sea. There will be no swimming and no clean. Meadow Brown. I don't know much of abundance, airtight, tight stretched, tight-lipped, tight-laced, watertight, close-knit, sleep skin slit. So when you come in your hundreds, there is nothing to compare you to. An excess of blowing, an outrage of wing, a departure of reason, fluttered fling beyond the subject, out of reach of, before, sea-shorn.
Thank you so much. All of those readings were so amazing and so beautiful. Everything's making me really emotional at the moment. We were just talking before we began recording about the idea of this 6-month stage that we're at through this peculiar pandemic year. And I think I am definitely at the stage where basically anything makes me cry a bit. I was getting really emotional listening to that. Really beautiful. Gosh, what amazing reading there's going to be next year when these books come out as well. So there was lots of sea going on there, wasn't there? As well as those beautiful waterfalls, Jessica, as well. And it really made me long for places that aren't the local, actually, for me, which is really interesting. So I thought we'd start with a really general question about what swimming means to each of you, why it's important to you, and then start to think about how it made its way into your writing. So I don't know who wants to jump in on that first. What does swimming mean to you?
I can lead on that. I think for me, it's the best vehicle really for getting into my body and getting into a landscape, because I think one of the great benefits of swimming, and particularly swimming in bodies of fresh water, I'm a big fan of lakes. You know, when you get out into the middle of the water, there is that sensation of being really in the place where you are, literally submerged in it. And there's something about that activation of the skin, activation of sensation that you get with water all around you, that I think is like nothing else. And that is, I mean, that's the bit that I crave, right? That sensation, that's why I go. It's not really anything else. It's just to have that fleeting moment of sensation, I think.
That's really interesting, because I think a lot of swimming literature talks about how the sense of risk maybe that you get from being in the water puts you specifically into your body in a way that, for me, swimming is very much about that sense of leaching into the landscape instead. I kind of swim in some ways to get away from my body, or away from my body as I experience it most of the time on land. I suppose that's the important point. But being in water allows me to feel like I'm part of something else. And yeah, that's really interesting. Nina, what about you?
I think I feel just most at home in my body actually when I'm in water. And also because I very often have trouble feeling at home in a kind of on a particular piece of land. There's like not many places where I've spent a long time putting down roots. And so I'll automatically kind of be drawn to wherever I can swim in a place where I live. And it's been that way my whole life. I've always loved to swim. And but it's really only very recently I started to write about swimming. And yeah, it was Jessica's memoir Turning, which really like made me think that I could write about swimming, and also an essay by Patricia Lockwood, actually, in her book Pre-Study, which is not about swimming, but there's the most beautiful piece in there about swimming. Yeah, and I thought, wow, this thing that is such a big part of me, I've not actually written about before until a couple of years ago. So
it's really interesting. We'll come back to that in a second. Elizabeth Jane, what about you? What does swimming mean to you?
Yeah, well, I relate to most of those things that everyone's saying, really, and that sense of the body, perhaps Polly, particularly what you were saying about that, I appreciate. And in yoga, there's that term when you do twists, they call it wringing the body out. I don't know if there are any yogis amongst us, but I get that from swimming, that sense of the water just unraveling you, And you know, it's a real, obviously, a stress reliever and tension releaser, and that cold water obviously has a lot of health benefits that we know about now. But I think, you know, as well as being in the water, there's that sense of leaving the water. I always feel really exhilarated when I've left the water, so I do it as much for that as for the pleasure of being in the water as well. But certainly also there's that sense of immersion that Jessica was talking about, and also, you know, all the company that you keep that you don't on land. So I love being amongst the microorganisms in the water and the invertebrates and the birds overhead. You know, there's something really wonderful about keeping new company, I think, in the water.
I was really struck by that, actually, with all of the pieces that you read were about sharing,
Yeah.
and about community and being with other creatures, whether human or non-human creatures, in the water. And I thought that was really lovely, because I think a lot of the time, again, with the kind of writing that we get about something, it can be very a kind of a wet version of the Lone Enraptured Male, which is not very interesting to me, really, because I think you do get that sense of sharing that happens with the water.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you deliberately set out to, I guess with your poetry, you really did deliberately set out to think about those other bodies in there?
Yeah, absolutely, I did. And so I saw this survey with the 39 invertebrates, some of which I was very aware of. They make themselves known and you do come into close contact with them, but others I hadn't thought of before seeing that survey. And then it was a sort of conscious acts of looking to try and meet these organisms or creatures, and yeah, that was part of it. So it can be the more than human, but also the human as well. I mean, I liked hearing about the friends that, you know, in Nina and Jessica's work, that you've gone swimming, you know, with others. And I think that, you know, as you're saying, probably that sense of community, it's with the more than human, but it is with others as well, and often other women.
Yeah. And that sense of maybe swimming as something that's shared and passed on as well. Because I know in the essay version of Small Bodies of Water, there is that reflection on beginning swimming and swimming in childhood, and that sense of how you begin and pass something on, which is there with talking about your mum there as well, Jessica. And I wondered what you thought. Again, had you deliberately set out to think about those relationships in the water?
I think in my case, at least, and I wrote something about this recently, actually, I was thinking about it. I don't really feel a distinct separation between the thought of swimming and the thought of closeness with my mother. And that's because we took lessons together when I was growing up. I learned with my mother. She didn't know how to swim when I was a kid. So we both took lessons together at the YMCA. And so I think for me, the idea of getting into water has always been really intimately connected with this idea of a mother-daughter relationship, of my girlhood, at least, and that sort of period of time we spent together. So it's always kind of there in the back of my mind. As much as I go swimming alone now, it's, you know, I haven't been swimming with my mom in ages, right? But it's those few moments when we do, it really, I don't know, there's something about it that feels like almost like mile markers to me in a way.
What about you, Nina?
That's really interesting. I have just realized now that swimming is something that I used to do with my dad when I was little, and it's like kind of, well, my dad and I have spent a lot of time together, but not really sort of just us two alone. And now that I think about it, it would be swimming and maybe walking and occasional kind of cycling when I was really little. And that's really nice to think about, actually, because my mum doesn't like swimming at all. So I think when I think of swimming when I was little, I associate it with my dad, and also swimming alone, which I've been really comfortable doing kind of since I was little. Although when I was little, it means me kind of alone in a pool and my parents nearby, you know. But now swimming is so much a solitary activity for me, not just during lockdown, but quite generally. Like here I live nearby the pond and I swim there alone, and a lot of women go there in groups and it's a place of community. I really love going there alone. And yeah, I know that reading Turning made me think so much about swimming alone and being alone in a landscape, and so that's something I'm always thinking about now, and swimming has made me more brave and comfortable being alone in a landscape like that.
That's really interesting. That I hadn't thought of that relationship between being alone swimming and being alone more generally in a landscape, and I think there is a really interesting connection between those two things. I think I owe a lot of my swimmability to the fact that my mum was a late learner as well at swimming, and because of that, and because she never really conquered her fear of putting her head in the water. So she still she loves to swim, but she swims like people laugh at her, she laughs at herself because she swims incredibly upright like this. And when we were kids, we were never allowed to splash her as well. We can never get her hair wet and things. And that's partly because she didn't learn to swim until she moved to the Midlands in her 20s. And my dad actually encouraged her to learn to swim because she was going sailing with him. And so she was very keen that we all learned to swim as children. But for me, that meant that I learned to swim at a local swimming baths in Nottingham, which is now an evangelical church and a climbing wall. It's been split into two days. Really interesting. And I had this amazing swimming teacher who I absolutely adored. And she's the only reason that I ever learned to put my face in the water, because I was terrified of it, and like really deeply bodily terrified of putting my head in the water. And at the end of every lesson, she'd make me dunk my head. And then one day I just kind of took off in the water, and that was it. And I was kind of gone. It's like my transformation into an amphibian was complete. And then I went into a different zone. But I swim alone a lot. And I have friends I swim with, and I love to swim with friends. It's always really fun. But for me, there's nothing better than that feeling of just shedding everything. It makes me feel really antisocial to say that. But that kind of solitary communion with things other than human is really important part of the process to me. But a bit like you said, Nina, I didn't really think about writing about swimming for a long time. And even though it's always been a really big part of my life, I don't think I saw a way to connect those things. There wasn't really a model for how I saw to do that until more recently. So where did you, obviously, Nina, you said you came into writing about swimming after reading those other things. What about Jessica and Elizabeth Jane? How did you get to writing about swimming? Jessica, your first book is a swimming book. How did that happen?
Sorry, I just muted myself briefly because apparently this is very noisy here today. It's a helicopter flying overhead.
It's just because we're recording things. It's a unique law of recording stuff that as soon as you try and do it, there's all sorts of weird noises going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I came to the idea of writing about my swims, not in, not really in a literary way at first. I think it was part of my PhD initially. I was doing field work, participant observation field work with winter swimmers at the pond where Nina also swims. And that for me meant I had to be swimming and writing about it. And at first I didn't really know how to go about it because it didn't make sense to me to write about such a visceral thing in a cold academic tone. Like that was not something I wanted to do. And so I feel like it sort of became quite slippery. And then I ended up spending probably years writing about nothing but swimming and drifting towards the kind of writing I'm doing now, which is probably more literary, more nature writing. But at the time, yeah, it was one of those things that was just sort of happenstance. I chose this research topic and I was working on it, and there it was. And I did not realize it would preoccupy me for so many years.
So it took you over, really.
Yeah.
How about you, Elizabeth Jane? Because obviously your first book is a book of swims as well. It's literally called Swim.
Yeah, so it was a sort of conscious thing, and it coincided with my move to Birmingham. So going to the Midlands and not having that open water, or easy access to rivers and so on that I had grown up with, just made me think much more consciously about where is my next swim, where's my next fix. And so I had to plot out these swims across the country. And then similarly, my writing was very squeezed at that time. It was a very busy work time. And I was thinking, well, while I'm taking this time out to swim, I can also take time out to write. And the two came together in that way. So that's how it started, really, in just a sort of sense of desperation at wanting to be near the water and wanting to write. And so the two gelled, together.
And what about the kind of logistical and structural challenges about trying to write about swimming? Because I often find, like, I swim and I think, oh, I have to write about this. And then I get out of the water, I'm like, how do I even approach that? There's no way, I can't get the lake onto the page. How does it happen?
I think Polly and I think we've talked about the kind of logistics of how cold it is before, haven't we? Even just the act of holding a pen once you've come out of cold water, is really difficult. And in those first moments out of the water, you're really sort of needing to warm up, yet the act of writing will slow you down and keep you stationary. So there's that very bodily restriction that I find with swimming. But for me, it's important to note things down, even in all that uncomfortableness, as soon as they've occurred, and sort of things that will have come to me as I've been swimming, and then I'll flesh them out later. But I do have that on the spot note taking. That's really important for me.
Earlier in the year, way back in that strange other land where you still met people in person, and there were literary events, and people were still doing in real life residencies and stuff. There was a poet, Anna Selby, in residence here in Grasmere, and she swims a lot, and she writes underwater with like a space pen. She actually writes in the water, which I thought was a really amazing idea. I'd never thought of. She has like a waterproof pad and a space pen.
Amazing.
And that's brilliant. But I just think anything that I wrote would probably just it would be scribbles, because it would be too cold to make shapes and make sense.
I always get out and make audio, like I make voice memos to myself on my phone, or I use the Notes app, and then it's not like there's nothing complete about that. It'll be like a list of nouns, it'll be a list of adjectives, or just like 3 words that came into my mind while I was swimming, just so that I can, have those little traces later, so I can rebuild that experience. But I sometimes think that the best way to get into writing about a swim is to sit down and first try to write it from point A to point B, every single moment, and then figure out how to sculpt that into something. But otherwise you lose the details, right? Like I feel like I would lose every small thing, because I don't know, there's something about that sensation. It's so fleeting, but it's so vivid, and I'm always wanting to hold it.
I tend to use my Notes app as well, like when I'm kind of walking back home, and kind of going over the details in my head on my walk, which really helps, because walking is a good way of kind of going over things I might want to write. And but I think at first I found it really challenging, trying to capture the fleetingness of a swim, and also I love the challenge of not using the same words, but to describe the same body of water that might look very similar from day to day, but is actually changing really slowly. And I think it encourages me to be more flexible with language and form. So if I'm writing prose, it will inevitably be a bit kind of poem-like, because I can't really separate the two for myself anyway. And so I like to embrace the slipperiness of it.
I think that's something that I really love about all of your writing, all three of you, that there is this slipperiness to the form, this kind of shiftingness, this wateriness of the form, which to me really makes sense with writing about swimming, but also seems to directly come out of the experience of it as well. But I wonder whether that just happens. Does that happen organically because you're writing about swimming, or is it partly deliberate as well to think about the lyric in a different kind of way?
I think, sorry, it's heightened for me, but I would say all my writing is slippery. So just the act of being is slippery for me, but I think something about water does heighten it, I think.
I agree.
Yeah, there's a sort of call to think a lot more, I think, about rhythm and about the sort of movement of language when you're writing about water. I mean, obviously it should be there all the time when writing, but I think when I start to write about water, slippery is really the right word that Nina used there. It really starts to just get a bit like fluid, and it happens, and it becomes so much about that rhythm and how I hear it, how the words run together. Yeah, that's a huge component of it for me, I think.
I think also being in water lets me be in my body very fully, and I think that helps me be a better writer, to think of poems or bits of prose as physical things and extensions of the experience of being physically.
Like in a body.
Yeah, that embodied experience and the kind of sensory experience does, I think, make you think differently and then make you write differently. But there is that double thing that we were talking about before of both being differently aware of your own body, but also differently aware of your body's relationship to other bodies. I think that you get in bodies of water, that you're aware of these other bodies and water itself as a body. And as something that thinking about that idea of home and belonging that you were talking about, Nina, that the water being a bit like the moon, that it's like something that's both very specific to where you are every time you see it, or experience it, but also something that's also everywhere and is like a kind of big macro organism as well in some way.
Like it can be a shared space, like if I kind of think of swimming in the ocean, and the ocean is a kind of connective force, but then lakes and ponds being so specific to the locality that they're in. I'm still figuring out what I mean to say about home and water, but yeah.
I think when you're getting into a lake, there is that, how do I put it? It never feels, for me at least, like it's distinct though, right? Because there is that sensation of fresh water and that knowledge, I think, of fresh water as being part of a watershed and being part of this community that's both on land and in the water. And that always really, I mean, you can't not think about it when you're getting into a lake or a river, because you're going to get mucky, right? Like there is that very visceral squelching through, which I think is so different from what you get on a beach when you step into the sea. There's something about sand that feels I don't want to say less connected, but you don't get that sensation of squelching in and sinking down and connecting with the soil as much as you are with the water. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. Thinking about soil and mud rather than sand or stone is very different.
Yeah.
I really love that bit at the very beginning of Swims, Elizabeth Jane, where this I don't have it in front of me and I can't quote it directly because my memory is like a very leaky colander, but where you talk about the relationship between the body and the water and the different bodies of water, and when I read that, I thought, yes, that's exactly how it is.
It's that sense of sort of interrelation, isn't it? And I think in the beginning part of Swims, there's that sort of expanding of the human body so that limbs start to become, watercress or whatever else you're encountering, and so that the sense of the human body gets extended and entwined with what's around it. So yeah, certainly that sense.
And how does that vary between different bodies of water as well? You know, it's because it is very different swimming in a river to swimming in a lake to swimming in the sea, and each bit of sea, each time you go to the same bit of sea, it's different as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is different every time with each swim, you know, dependent on who else is there, you know, what else is happening in that space. So the ecosystem is different each time, and so you respond to it.
At the moment, it's lots of acorns and red and yellow leaves, and it's been lovely, kind of being able to more viscerally sense the autumn, the arrival of autumn in the water. Then out of the water, the weather's been very strange. The temperatures have, you know, not been consistent. I really like that. I also really like to write about swimming pools, which some would be like, oh, that's not real swimming. But for me, it's all connected. And it was the writer Leanne Shapton's book, Swimming Studies, which really got me thinking about girlhood and swimming pools. Because I grew up mostly in cities, and so I learned to swim in swimming pools like most of us. And so to me, that's really interesting too.
Swimming pools are such strange places, aren't they? They're kind of a bit like airports in that kind of non-place.
Yeah.
So they could be on the moon. Yeah, I'm really fascinated by how peculiar they are, how alike and unlike each other again they are. These kind of weird sensation, like overstimulation that you get at a swimming pool with the echoey noises and the sense of the chemicals and things. Really interesting.
That's the best smell in the world. I will still maintain it's the most evocative smell, and that's for me. A swimming pool, any swimming pool, in some sense, could be the same as another because of the smell. In fact, when I go into these non-chlorinated swimming pools, which I realize are better, but when I go into them, the smell, I'm like, yeah, it's not there, right? So I don't know, like when you go to a hotel and there's an indoor pool, that to me is like the most exciting smell of my childhood.
There's a kind of cognitive dissonance, isn't there, when you go to a man-made pool and there isn't that smell. I think. But I wonder if in the future people will still have that as well, if people shift away from chlorinated pools more widely.
I mean, it's a strange thing to be nostalgic about, isn't it? It's like the smell of chemical sunscreen and chlorinated pools are like my favorite two smells.
Yeah.
But I think it's partly because they're so strong, and if they are linked to things in childhood, you know, there's a kind of almost Proustian thing about them, isn't there? Like when you smell chlorine in your hair, even several days after you've swum in a pool, it continually takes you back to that pool, doesn't it? It's a really interesting relationship. But then that does bring up that question about kind of ecosystems and environmental responsibility. And what's happening when we swim. And I have to admit, I only became aware a few years ago about the importance of biosecurity, especially here in the Lake District, where we have some lakes that are, and I struggle with this term, but some lakes which are pristine, and many which aren't, and have invasive species in them, which are all very loaded terms in their own ways. But there's been a lot of problems with people doing triathlons and spreading microorganisms from one lake to another within the same day on all of their kit. And I've only learned about that more recently, and I'm more aware of that now when I'm swimming, but it makes me think more of other wider environmental effects of what we're doing as well. And I don't know whether you're all conscious of these things when you're swimming, how much that affects your process of both writing and of swimming itself as well.
I feel like it's one of those things that's like, how do I put it? You have to be acutely aware of it when you're going to a body of water. And what you just mentioned about like moving microorganisms from one to another, I also think it's a problem also of a kind of swimming, right? Like if kit intensive swimming, wetsuit intensive. I have a real beef with wetsuits, as I think you know. But I do think there is, as a writer, also that channel through which the writing and the act of swimming and sort of bringing that to the page is such an awareness generating thing. I think, you know, a lot of people don't give bodies of freshwater in particular any thought. And particularly the sort of risk currently facing freshwater biodiversity in the world. I mean, I think it's just not on a lot of people's radar. When people speak about biodiversity loss, they think it's, you know, it's sort of the very charismatic megafauna, right? But all of the, yeah, and all of the most threatened species are actually freshwater species. And most people aren't aware of that. And so I think for me, even calling attention to water, calling attention to these species, as Elizabeth Jane has done so wonderfully in the poems shared earlier, I think being able to call attention to species in the ocean and in freshwater, it's really, that's one of the gifts of taking the time to write about it. So it is always sort of a counterbalanced thing in a way.
Yeah, I think just to add, I think there is a sense of sadness sometimes in my swimming and in my writing. There's also that is almost a kind of elegy that sort of how long actually can I swim safely in these waters. And I've seen, you know, in the years that I've been swimming, I've seen, you know, a growth in the amount of pollution in there, and I'm much more wary, and there are bodies of water I used to swim in that I don't now. So, you know, there is a sense of sort of sadness and a need to draw attention to the plight of these organisms we're sharing the space with, but also, you know, not to abandon that sense of pleasure and hope and everything that is fantastic and still there and still recoverable. So it's a counterbalance, yeah.
Yeah, to me, that sense of keeping pleasure and hope is so important, because I think if you don't have that, what do we care about? You have to have a joy and a pleasure in those things too.
Mm.
Do you think about that much with your swimming, Nina, or is that?
I think about it a lot in trying to write about swimming and trying to do just what you said, Polly and Elizabeth Jane, about holding both at the same time, in the same moment, the pleasure and the wonderful sensation of swimming and the strength that it gives us, and then also at the same time confronting fear of loss, which is like, it's an incredibly difficult thing to convey, incredibly difficult thing to feel at once. So I think writing helps me work through this, and it's inevitable to sometimes feel that sense of loss when you go to a body of water. I think I'm a naturally very anxious person though, and swimming really helps me with that, and to just feel more deeply connected to the land where I am, which I think, you know, will help all of us kind of heal our relationship with nature in some way. Yeah,
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you have to have this connection. I think that relationship with nature is so important, and that's what we've all been talking about getting through swimming, isn't it? But then I always have these like then guilty, doubtful questions about whether I'm part of the problem if I'm there, because I do wear a wetsuit in the winter. I can't swim in the winter without one, and increasingly I have all the kit which I used to be very derisive of as well. You know, I used to very much think the whole point of swimming is that you just go to water and get in it. But then I realized I didn't want to go to a chlorinated pool in the winter anymore. And for me, a lot of that is to do with my relationship with my own body and with disability as well. And I've got increasingly sensitive to those chemicals over the years as well. So I find it harder and harder to be around them. But the same conditions that make it difficult for me to be in a chlorinated pool also make it difficult for me to put my body in cold water. So it becomes this kind of strange double bind. So I'm aware of how environmentally loaded that is, but also how socially and politically loaded that is in different ways as well. And something we've touched on through this conversation but haven't really got into yet is thinking about the particularity of your own bodies, and how you feel about that relationship between the water and your body as gendered or racialized or politicized in different ways, and what you think that gives to your writing as well.
I've been thinking a lot lately about the accessibility of bodies of water, and just this whole time being at home so much, and just being so grateful that I'm able to, access somewhere where I can swim, and which is now, ticketed and doubled the price as it used to be. Which has been a huge issue, and just the strangeness of a space like that being monetized. On the one hand, it's like, how can it not be in this day and age? On the other hand, it's just, so it really shouldn't be. And I think about that with swimming pools as well, how they're kind of these strange, nostalgic utopian spaces, which are, again, ticketed and
increasingly privatized as well, increasingly expensive. So, saying that the public baths that I learned to swim in then were sold off by the council and have become private use, and you can't learn to swim there now. You maybe have to go to a leisure centre instead, and you have to pay to go in a different way. That there are these kind of massive access issues around getting to water, as well as kind of cultural issues, I think, about whether you even get to learn to swim in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, I've been thinking about it a lot lately because I'm leaving Germany, where things are very freely accessible and you can swim in pretty much any body of water you come across. And where I live, at least in the state surrounding Berlin, they're all clean enough to swim in and pretty much all freely accessible. There are very few privatized lakes. And now that I'm moving back to the UK and I'm going to be living in London, I've been following the situation at the ponds very closely, because that was the subject of my PhD research, was public access to the heath and to the ponds. It really scares me, I think, and it really feels like a very particular to Britain kind of energy of wanting to say, okay, wild swimming, open water swimming, all these things are growing. Let's create spaces for them, but let's create spaces where you have to book an appointment, where you have to pay for a ticket, you have to wear a wetsuit in a lot of cases, you're forced to wear a kit. It caters to a very specific kind of market and commercialization, and really, I think, glosses over this issue of access and of what a swimmer might be turning up to do, and a swimmer's skill level, and all of these little things that just get missed by that very blanket approach to it, which, I don't know, maybe they're concerned about insurance or whatever it is. But, I've spent the past 6 years getting on my bike and basically getting into any body of water I see, and that is completely legal here. That's allowed, and that's been a great gift and a great freedom, and I'm pretty devastated to be leaving it, if I'm honest.
Well, it's a kind of strange thing where something so normal and simple as going for a swim becomes a subversive political act purely because of where you're swimming.
Yeah, and something that you have to put in the schedule. The idea that it's like, I need to book my swim and have this appointment and get on an online booking system and try to battle through the other people to get, my appointment to swim. It's baffling.
And knowing that you could do it that day as well, because for me there's a lot of uncertainty about whether I would be able to swim on a particular, I don't know until I wake up in the morning, or even maybe partway through the day, whether that would be possible for me. And it's like, no, it's gone. In Swims, Elizabeth Jane, you kind of deal with some of that as you go through as well, with kind of access and who gets to go to places and what they mean as well. I guess, do you think about that a lot in terms of those places in Devon as well?
Yeah, I think, it's a very real issue, and I think in swims there's the Lake District, obviously your neck of the woods, Polly, but there were quite a few places there that were inaccessible when I was looking to swim there, and so it featured Grasmere, which of course we can swim in, but there were plenty that fishing rights had the monopoly on, which is a real factor in a lot of rivers as well. So yeah, you do have to, put it into your planning. And, as I was saying, it was something that we want to be quite a spontaneous, perhaps, act, really is less and less so. So for me, also just, checking the water pollution level on the day and all those sorts of things are added into my swimming planning and diary, which wouldn't have been there before.
It's increasingly complicated in different ways. I'm very aware of the fact that we are running up to our time. So I thought maybe we could end on, I don't know if you want to share another little bit of writing before we finish, or if you just want to tell us about a favorite swim of yours.
Got a poem that's about a favorite swim.
Yeah, excellent.
I can read it first if you like. It's actually a swim that I also that featured in Small Bodies of Water, and I read a bit about it when a huge shag was underwater with me, which was terrifying at first, and then quite amazing because it wasn't a whale or shark or something. This is about Wellington Harbour, which is where I've probably the kind of the sea where I've swum the most. Last summer we were underwater, and we asked, "What are you doing there, moon?" Our bodies neck deep in salt and rain. Each crater is a sea, you said, and dived under the sun before I could speak, water rushing over your skin, the place where chocolate ice cream had melted and formed, a newly formed freckle on the surface of us, and the islands crumbling apart softly over sea caves, somewhere opening my mouth into the waves to say, "You are, you are, you are."
So beautiful, thank you.
Thanks.
I have a little excerpt I can read, a tiny excerpt just from a piece that I'm working on, which is about the Chinese sea goddess Matsu. In the spring of 960 AD, on the island of Meizhou off the Chinese coast of Fujian, a girl is born, an ordinary girl, perhaps. As a baby, she does not cry. They name her Lin Wanyang, Wanyang meaning silent girl. This much is rarely debated. The legends of the girl Wanyang diverge from here. She's either born to a family of fishermen or to a prominent local official. She is either a devout follower of Guan Yin, the Buddhist goddess of mercy, or is trained from a young age in Taoist teachings. Or perhaps, and this is the story I prefer, she spends her childhood in the sea, swimming. In every story, Lin Wanyang is a swimmer, a young girl swimmer venerated as a god. I'll stop there.
I love that.
We're doing an event in October at the Barbican Centre about goddesses, and that will be for that. So,
I love the idea of a girl who's a goddess because she's in the water. Wonderful. Elizabeth Jane.
Yeah, I've got another short poem from Offsea. This is Mud Shrimp. She swam only at night, on the spring tides, in the silk light of water slipping her over the mud flats. When they studied why she did it, drifted far beyond her limits, though it made her vulnerable to prey. Several theories came, but none swam. At night, in a spring tide, in the silk light, unsure of itself, becoming only what is left after breaking.
So wonderful. Thank you so much. Just to finish, do you have a favorite swim that you want to share? Obviously, Nina, yours has been in a poem. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Only that it's that stretch of beach, which is kind of the beach that is really in central Wellington. So I love Wellington because the sea is there and then the hills are right behind it. So it's just such a beautiful spot, and I always get ice cream and sit on the beach. Yeah.
That sounds amazing right now. I wish we could do that.
Usually very cold and windy, but it doesn't matter. It's lovely.
It feels cruel to try and I don't know why I've even asked this, because I have a complete inability to choose favorites of anything. And I asked you to do it. And obviously, Jessica, you know, turning is about 5. I had no idea before I read it that Berlin was surrounded by lakes and that there were so many of them as well. It's like picking a favorite child.
Yeah, it's just people are always like, what's your favorite lake? Or tell me your 5 favorite lakes. And I feel like every time I give that list, it's different. It's so mood dependent in every swim. I mean, I could say my last swim was the best swim in a way. It was really good, the one I had last week. I had a 2 swim day. But I think, you know, the swim that I think about a lot that really was just a standout swim for me was that one I read about at the beginning of my reading in Taiwan, in the Nungao waterfall. And that is, you know, I think that's just the sort of incredible location that really does it, because I had hiked up that mountain and I was exhausted and my legs were aching. And it was at 3,000 meters. So the water was super icy. But in Taiwan, you don't really get cold water. And being a cold water swimmer, I was desperate for some cold. So to be able to get into a waterfall that high up and just feel that sort of cut and that pain and the bliss that I think comes with it was really magical.
It sounds really magical. And hearing the extract, it's, yeah, you're there in the magic as well, I think. Elizabeth Jane, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it is a cruel question. And I mean, I have a favourite river, which is the Dart in Devon, and I write a lot about the Dart swims. But hearing Jessica speak about that one is making me think about a Welsh swim in Cader Idris, which again, so you have the hike up and then you reach that sort of cool plateau of the mountain water, and that was a real standout one for me, because it is like you have this huge bath to yourself when you swim out into the middle of the lake, and then you look down and it's like the water is just falling off the ends of the earth, you know, into the mountain valley. It's a really sort of dramatic scene. Wow. And really cool, and you know, as you expect from that kind of mountain location. Yeah, it's a lovely one.
Yeah, we all want to go there now. I can't pick a favorite, but an amazing experience I did have swimming around this time last year actually was in the Dart at Still Pool, where I swam with a kingfisher for the first time. And that was really magical. That was really beautiful, because I was crazy about kingfishers as a child, and to swim with one alongside was really lovely.
Every swimmer remembers their first kingfisher swim.
Yeah.
It's a magic thing.
Because they're just so bright, aren't they? On that trip, I saw a kingfisher in a different river in Devon as well. So that whole trip to me is like a kingfisher trip. But you know, you think, oh, will I notice if I see the kingfisher, and then you see one and you're like, well, obviously.
This summer I saw my first kingfisher.
Amazing.
I've only ever had one once while swimming, and it was actually in Taiwan and never in Britain, which I find bizarre. So
I know there are kingfishers around here as well, and I never see them, I think because more often I'm in lakes rather than rivers. So it's a different, something massive splashed up in the lake when I was swimming the other day, and I don't know what it is, but now I'm terrified of it. I've been joking for years about a massive pike that lives at the bottom of the lake. I think it actually was grass nessie, some kind of awful ancient pike. And you get a lot of water birds, but not kingfishers on the lake, sadly. But on that happy note, maybe we ought to close this up, and I'll just say thank you to all of you. This has been amazing. And to the audience, do check out their books, available from all good bookstores, of course. And do look out for these forthcoming books next year as well. Looks like 2021 is going to be a good year for swim books as well. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
You,
Thank
Polly.
you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Great.